Marisa Volkov had always led her life with great exactitude. She was the daughter of a painstaking clockmaker who had discovered early on that time had a way of ruining even the most carefully thought-out plans. Her days were spent running the family's little floral business, which she had taken over following the death of her father. The store was her haven, where she could lose herself in the soothing ritual of caring for delicate blossoms and engaging with the customers who had grown to be part of her extended family. It was more than just a livelihood. Ivan, Maris's husband, was as consistent as the sun rising. Ivan was the kind of partner who hardly stirred the waters of their home life. He was a reserved man, committed to his work as a sound engineer for a small production company. Marisa found comfort in the steady rhythm of their friendship, even though their marriage lacked the passionate sparks some of her friends claimed about. They had married young, but as Marisa knew, life was full of surprises. One especially cold autumn evening, a small turn of events started to tear apart the fabric of her carefully built universe. All of it began fairly benignly. Working late on a project involving something about a new audio design for an ambitious theater production, Ivan had been Marisa, had come to enjoy her alone evenings with a book and a glass of wine, even if her late evenings had grown familiar. But this specific night she was closing the store. Her phone buzzed with a warning. Ivan sent a brief and direct text, saying, "Working late again. Don't hold off." She stopped reading something about the message. Maybe it was the way he signed off without his usual affectionate "love you." Or maybe it was the awareness that over the past few months, these late evenings had grown rather regular. Marisa's head started to whirl with discomfort, and for the first time she felt a strange impulse to check Ivan's phone when he got home. Marisa pretended to be asleep when Ivan at last stumbled into the house, well past midnight, smelled faintly of whiskey. Before gently sliding out of bed to get his phone from the nightstand, she waited for his steady breathing, her heart thumping in her chest. Her hands shook as she worked over the gadget. She discovered what she dreaded not long after. Messages from several people saved under the name Nikolai were vague but suggestive, full of inside jokes and ideas Ivan had never brought up to her. Marisa's blood ran cold as she slid farther, her doubts mounting with every message. As Ivan slept off his late-night adventures the next morning, Marisa headed to the flower shop while her mind flew. Her discovery made her feel as though she was straw-taking underweight. This Nikolai, who was he, and what he meant to Ivan? Not yet. She could not muster herself to face him. She wanted further information. The inquiry started softly, almost as if she were engaged in a known ritual. Marisa began with the easiest of chores, more closely following Ivan's schedule, observing his comings and goings, noting the times he seemed to be distracted or detached. She went over his friend list and recent activity on his social media profiles. Though his behavior was subtly different, there was nothing particularly suspicious. Then arrived the evening that broke all. Marisa had other plans, while Ivan had informed her he was heading out with some colleagues following work. Hoping to see the truth that had been eluding her, she chose to follow him. Her heart pounding in her chest as he headed to a nondescript building on the outskirts of town, she trailed him subtly through the twisting streets. She watched from the shadows as Ivan went into the building. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, she saw him come out, this time carrying a woman. Seeing them together felt to her like a dagger to her heart. They stood near, too near, and spoke she couldn't hear. The woman leaned in and kissed him then, without warning. Tears welled up in Marisa's eyes. Her breath caught in her throat and her sight blurred. She was at last seeing enough. Still, fate wasn't doing with Marisa yet. She met Detective Marcus Shin, a tall, austere man with sharp features and a piercing eye, face to face early the next morning. Seeking Ivan's location the night before, he had come to the flower shop. Marisa stammered out a reply while her blood ran cold, her head whirling with questions. How had Ivan behaved? The whole weight of her dream didn't dawn on me until later that day, when Ivan's dead body was found in a far-off area just outside of town. The inquiry that followed would reveal secrets buried deep within their marriage. Secrets Marisa could never have imagined would send her down a sinister and dangerous road. Ivan's phone, left close to the crime scene, cracked and smeared with blood, providing the first clue for the investigators. The messages from Nikolai stood out among the digital evidence and begged more questions than they did answers as they filtered through. This enigmatic person was who and what relationship did they have to Ivan's early death? Marissa realized she was not only a bereaved widow as she watched her world fall apart around her. She was also a suspect in the murder of her husband, and in a frantic search for the truth, she would be compelled to face the darkest recesses of her soul as the inquiry dug further. Once discovered, some facts, though, never can be buried once more. Police interviews, quiet talks, and never-ending questions dominated the blur of days following Ivan's death. Marissa was a shadow of herself moving through the motions while her reality sank in. Under Marcus Shin's direction, the investigators were unrelenting in their quest of solutions. They pounced into every element of her life, analyzing her marriage, her contacts with Ivan, and her behavior on the evening of his death. The inquiry soon found that Ivan's death was not a random act of violence. The scene of the crime, a remote area close to a forested ravine, clearly displayed struggle. A hiker had found his body half hidden under a heap of dirt and leaves. Forensic teams had searched the area gathering evidence and piecemeal Ivan's last moments of life. Their findings presented a negative picture. Ivan had been bludgeoned to death, a blunt object breaking his back of skull. His hands showed defensive scars, suggesting he had fought back, but his attacker had been merciless. Nearby, partially submerged in a small stream, was the murder weapon, a big rock marinated in blood. The detectives came to see it as a crime of passion, brutal, frenzied, and profoundly personal. Marissa became the main suspect virtually right away. She was squarely in the middle of the inquiry when Ivan's phone was found close to the crime scene and the terrible messages exchanged with Nikolai. Thanks to her own admission of following Ivan the night before his death, the police knew of the turmoil in her marriage. To them, it seemed all too fitting that Marissa had discovered her husband's adultery right as his life was cruelly ended. Still, there were other directions as well. From the communications, the enigmatic Nikolai proved to be co-worker of Ivan's at the production company, Nikola Petrova. Early in her 30s, Nikola was a striking woman with sharp features and a confident attitude that covered a troubled background. 6 months ago, she was hired as a project manager, and she soon developed a close working relationship with Ivan. Close, as Marissa had found, was a minimization. When asked, Nikola freely admitted to the affair. She created images of a man caught between two worlds, his steady, predictable marriage to Marissa and the exciting, illegal relationship with her. Nikola claimed Ivan had promised to leave Marissa, but when asked specifics, he had always hesitated, pointing instead to his allegiance to his wife and the life they had created together. Their conflict had resulted from this uncertainty, which had set them on explosive arguments in the weeks before his passing. But Nikola's confession did not help to clear Marissa's record. If anything, it heightened the detectives' misgivings. They started to investigate the theory that Marissa had confronted Ivan and Nikola in the woods that evening during a fit of wrath and treachery. Maybe the confrontation became violent, and Ivan died. Up until a fresh piece of the jigsaw surfaced, the theory was reasonable, and the data appeared to confirm it. A forensic entomologist was called in to look over the body a few days into the inquiry. Expert Dr. Lorna Haza was a conscientious woman known for using the study of insect activity on dead bodies to expose latent facts. Her discoveries were startling, as well as intriguing. Ivan had been dead for less than 2 hours before his body was found, according to Dr. Haza. Thus, the chronology Marissa had supplied did not quite fit. Furthermore surprising was the entomologist's examination of Ivan's skin for traces of an unknown chemical, especially around the wounds. Following more investigation, the material turned out to be a rare kind of industrial adhesive used in soundproofing, the same sort used in Ivan's manufacturing company. This revelation turned the emphasis of the research from Marissa, at least momentarily, to Ivan's workplace. Investigating the production company, Detective Shin and his colleagues started interrogating Ivan's associates and closely examining the latest initiatives of the business. The waters grew more muddy the more they unearthed. Whispers of internal strife, contract negotiations gone sour, and allegations of corporate wrongdoing abound. Though apparently benign, Ivan's job as a sound engineer had put him in some possibly dangerous circumstances. The inquiry also turned up other people Ivan had become entangled with, besides Nikola. A few days before his death, Viktor Ilyich, another colleague, had been observed arguing with Ivan. Volatile and aspirational, Viktor had a history of running afoul of Ivan, especially on the course of the company's most recent project. Some colleagues surmised Viktor might have wanted Ivan out of the way since he felt threatened by his influence. Marissa found herself in a more and more vulnerable situation as the inquiry grew. The cops still saw her with mistrust, even though they were beginning to give other suspects thought. The scandal had found its way into the media, and Marissa's life was under public view. Eager for a tale about the grieving widow, who might also be a cold-blooded killer, reporters hounded her outside the floral shop. Marissa, though, knew the story had more to offer. Ivan's death was neither the outcome of a professional conflict gone wrong, nor a straightforward crime of passion. She needed to learn the truth, not only to clear her name, but also to comprehend the man she had spent so many years living with. Marissa knew she couldn't rely just on the police as their inquiry neared the truth. Should she seek answers, she would have to discover them herself. Secrets that might lead her down a road from which there was no return. Even if it meant exploring the darkest sides of her husband's secrets. Every day, Marissa's determination to find the truth about Ivan's death strengthened. She realized how little she had known the man she had been married to for more than 10 years, the more she knew about his secret life. Though it was moving too slowly for Marissa's taste, the police inquiry was revealing layers of dishonesty and treachery. She needed responses right now, as well as more generally. Marissa decided to probe the facets of Ivan's life that the police hadn't yet looked at, under close examination, alongside Nikola and his colleagues. Her first visit was Ivan's production company office. She entered his workspace with the aid of a sympathetic receptionist familiar with Marissa from corporate events. Like the man personally, the office was painstakingly neat, but Marissa's keen eye for detail soon found something out of order. Under stacks of audio equipment manuals in one of the drawers, Marissa discovered a little black notebook. It was old and well used. Ivan's neat handwriting filled the pages. She realized as she turned through it that it was something far more personal, a diary of sorts, tracking Ivan's ideas, worries, and, most remarkably, his mounting paranoia in the weeks before his death, than any work journal she had first assumed. Though Ivan had been terrified, the entries were disjointed and frequently ragged. He wrote of seeing watched and of knowing something horrible was about to happen. There were references to a project that had gone horribly wrong, late-night phone calls from unidentified numbers, and shadows following him. As Marissa read these passages, her heart surged, and she realized Ivan had become enmeshed in something far more dangerous than an affair, along with names, some familiar like Nikola and Viktor, and others Marissa did not know. The notebook included a notebook of notes Ivan had circled several times under the name Dmitry Kazakov, a name that simply read, "Trust no one." Marissa had never heard Ivan mention this name before, but she sensed that Dmitry was connected to whatever had driven Ivan to such fear. Marissa then visited the one person who might know more about Dmitry, Nikola. Marissa needed answers, even though the woman had already been helpful to the police. Dealing with her carried some risk. Her usual confidence clearly disturbed as she discovered Nikola seated alone with a cup of coffee in a little cafe close to the production company. At first dubious of Marissa's approach, Nikola seemed to soften under her desperate eyes. Following a tense quiet, Nikola started to speak, her voice low and guilt-ridden. She said Dmitry Kazakov was a freelancing contractor, hired to help with a very private project Ivan was working on. Nikola claimed that, although the project was meant to transform audio technology, something had gone quite wrong. Beyond mere differences of opinion, Dmitry and Ivan had been at odds. Growing erratic, Dmitry accused Ivan of undermining the project and threatened to destroy him. Once she knew Dmitry was dangerous, Nikola admitted she had tried to distance herself from the circumstances. Ivan had turned down her advice to do the same. He had been too committed to the project and too proud to give ground. Nikola's voice cracked as Marissa pressed for more specifics, since she acknowledged that the affair had begun as a means of escape for both of them, a way to forget the darkness invading their professional lives. But their relationship had grown more of a burden than a haven as the stress rose. Marissa left the cafe more curious than satisfied. Actually, Dmitry Kazakov was someone else. This project that had caused Ivan such desperation was what? Why had he also kept all of this secret from her? She knew she couldn't rely on the police to find the whole truth. They were too preoccupied with the most obvious suspects and too blind to the wider picture. Her next visit was Viktor Ilyich, the man who had argued with Ivan just before his death. She discovered him alone drinking at a rundown bar. Viktor was a challenging man to read, his attitude guarded and icy. But Marissa was resolved. After a few beers and much effort, he started to open. Viktor said he and Ivan had disagreed about the project, but he vowed he had nothing to do with Ivan's death. Viktor said Dmitri posed the actual threat. Dmitri was a brilliant but erratic man, he said, who had grown madly fixated on the project. Viktor said Dmitri was ready to do anything to keep the project under his control, since he thought it held the secret to unspoken wealth and power. Viktor also disclosed that Ivan had intended to notify the authorities about Dmitri's illicit activities, so undermining Dmitri and maybe destroying the whole project. Viktor decided to handle things, since he thought Dmitri had learned about Ivan's scheme. Viktor shrugged and murmured something about keeping his own hands clean, when Marissa questioned why he hadn't told the police this. Equipped with this fresh knowledge, Marissa came to see that she was in farther than she had ever dreamed. Dangerous by nature, Dmitri Kazakov would not hesitate to kill anyone else who stood in his path, should he have killed Ivan. Maris, though, was not ready to give up. Ivan had been many things: secretive, remote, unfaithful, but he did not deserve to die like this. Marissa knew she was walking into a lion's den as she got ready to meet Dmitri. She lacked option, though it meant risking everything she had left. The truth was out there, buried under layers of lies and dishonesty, and she was resolved to find it. Her survival, long enough to see justice done, remained the only issue of concern. As Marissa drove to the rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, the evening sky darkened. The place exuded desolation, the kind that cautioned visitors to stay away. But Marissa's need for answers took front stage over her fear. She had spent the day compiling as much data on Dmitri Kazakov as she could, but all she found were half-truths and nebulous rumors. The man was a ghost, devoid of clear background, and few people ready to talk about him. She was almost facing him alone now. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows like hollow eyes peering out into the evening. Marissa parked a little distance away, her heart thumping as she got to the door. She pushed open the heavy steel door, which creaked menacingly to expose a dimly lit interior, strewn with old machinery and forgotten containers. Every sound bounced off the cool concrete walls as the air smelled strongly of dust and oil. Dmitri was anticipating her. He was in the middle of the room, his shadow shaped by one overhead bulb, flickering. Tall and thin, Dmitri had a gaunt face and sharp eyes that radiated a quiet menace that made Marissa shudder. He watched her with a predatory silence, not moving as she came in. Dmitri said, his voice low and smooth, "You're braver than I expected. Maybe more stupid as well." Trying to keep her voice steady, Marissa said, "I need answers. Regarding Ivan, regarding the project and everything else." Dmitri's lips opened to a chilly smile. "All right, Ivan." One such pity. Though too moral for his own benefit, he was a brilliant man. He lost sight of the whole picture. Marissa stepped forward, her hands closed at her sides. "What, Dmitri? Happened that evening? You killed him for what reason?" Dmitri's smile darkened and was replaced with a cold, deliberate stare. "Marissa, I did not kill him. Not directly either. But the moment he chose to betray me, his death was unavoidable." "Betray you?" Marissa echoed, her uncertainty deepening. Dmitri started to pace slowly, hands closed behind his back. "Ivan was my project partner. One project that might have turned around everything. He lost his nerve, though. He began chatting on ethics and responsibility. He wanted to reveal our work to the authorities. What we were doing seemed to him to be beyond such small worries." "What initiative was this?" Marissa pressed, her voice wavering. "What could be so crucial that you would let him die for it?" The stopped pacing. Dmitri turned to face her, his eyes ablaze with a fervent brightness. "Marissa, it was a breakthrough. A fresh front in sound technology. Something able to alter the very fabric of experience. With the correct frequencies, patterns, we could affect minds, regulate emotions, even change reality itself. Ivan was the key. His knowledge and inventiveness were unparalleled. He was weaker, though. He was unable of handling the authority we possessed. Marissa started to have a cold sweat across her forehead. The project sounded like something from a dream, a perilous mix of science and lunacy. "You got rid of him," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Dmitri gave a slow headshake. "No, Marissa. He sold himself. The guilt of what we had done, of what we were about to unleash, would not allow Ivan to live," I cautioned him when he seemed inclined to reveal us. Nevertheless, he paid no attention. At least he tried. He went to the cops, but they paid him little attention. How could they? The project was overly secret and too advanced. His own conscience tormented him, and in the end, it destroyed him. Marissa struggled to understand Dmitri's words, and her mind spun. "But he was killed," she said firmly. "He did not only die of guilt." Dmitri's countenance grew darker. "Perhaps you are correct. Maybe someone else handled affairs on their own. Though I cautioned Ivan. I did not kill him. Others participated in the project, people who would stop at nothing to guard it. Perhaps one of them decided Ivan presented too great a risk." The blood of Marissa ran cold. If Dmitri was speaking the truth, then someone even more dangerous was involved in this lethal game. "Who?" she pleaded. "Who else participated?" Dmitri turned his head, as though deciding whether to respond. "You definitely know some of the names already." Of course, Victor was always more worried with his own aspirations than with the actual promise of the project. Although she was more of a spectator, Nicola knew enough to be dangerous. One name, though, should really catch your attention. Marissa gasped as Dmitri drew in closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "Konstantin Stadnik." Marissa understood nothing from the name, but the way Dmitri spoke, it made her shudder. "Who is him?" Her voice wrenched as she asked. "A man operating in the shadows," Dmitri answered. "He supported the project, but his interests go much beyond science. Konstantin is merciless. This man will do all it takes to reach his objectives, without regard to cost." Before Marissa could ask further, the warehouse echoed with footfall. Dmitri stiffened, his eyes narrowed as he turned toward the door. "You have to go," he urged quickly. "Now." "Still, but..." "Now, Marissa," Dmitri gasped. "You have created a nest for a hornet. Should Konstantin learn that you are inquiring?" Marissa was not in need of twice telling. Heart pounding, she turned and ran back to her car. Her mind whirled with the ramifications of what she had discovered as she drove from the warehouse. Ivan had been caught in a web of ambition and dishonesty, a web that was now engulfing her. Though she knew she had to locate this Konstantin Stadnik, she had no idea where to start. Now she seemed to be under observation by someone far more dangerous, while the police were still monitoring every action she made. One idea tormented her as she rushed across the black streets. She was running out of time. She could hold the truth, but her situation grew more dangerous the closer she got. The secrets she discovered had already claimed one life, and if she wasn't careful, they would claim hers as well. Still, Marissa was resolved. She had to see this through to the very last, without regard to expense. Now survival dominated, rather than only Ivan's death. And whether or not she was ready for it, the last confrontation loomed. Marissa understood she could not sprint indefinitely. With all its sharp edges, the truth had sliced right into her life and left her with no option except to meet it squarely. A better picture of the risk she was in started to show as she put the bits of Ivan's life together. Konstantin Stadnik was a force, a shadowy figure working outside the law, not just a name whispered in dark corners. Now, he had his sights set on her. Marissa was standing before an unidentified building in an industrial area the next evening, clutching the address she had been able to gather from a frightened Victor. Konstantin's headquarters was a fortification passing for an office. Though this was her last chance, she understood the hazards. Ivan's death, the project, the lies, all pointed to this man. She had to face him if she was going to survive and learn just exactly what had happened. The lobby was simple and austere, and the receptionist there watched Marissa with cold mistrust. But Marissa had seen this coming forward. She mentioned Ivan's name and the project, and following a tense moment, she was led through a sequence of security doors into a sleek, dimly lit office. Konstantin Stadnik was standing waiting for her. He was not at all like she had pictured, tall, immaculately groomed, with a calm, understated power that made her skin crawl. though his eyes were like ice, calculating, devoid of empathy. Marissa stayed on her feet, her pulse racing even as he motioned for her to sit. With a smooth but menacing voice, Konstantin said, "You're braver than I expected, Mrs. Volkov. Most people wouldn't dare look for me. I came here not to play games," Marissa said, her voice steady despite the terror chewing at her gut. "I'm curious as to Ivan's killing motivation. The project was what, and why did it matter so much?" The smile of Konstantin missed his sight. "Though he was a smart man, your husband made the fatal mistake of thinking morality above development. Though the project was revolutionary, Ivan lacked the degree of dedication needed. He threatened to reveal us and destroy all we had laboriously created. And for this reason you had him murdered?" Marissa insisted, her fists tightened. Konstantin considered her and leaned back in his chair. "Ivan proved to be a liability. I did not, however, kill him. Someone who knew the stakes handled him. The project had to be kept under all possible protection. Ivan sadly saw nothing like that." As Marissa realized the whole weight of what he was saying, her heart hammered. Ivan had been quieted by the very powers he had once believed in, not by the treachery of a lover or a jealous colleague. The project had eaten him. Now it threatened to eat her as well. "You've seen too much, Mrs. Volkov," Konstantin said, his voice softening into something nearly sympathetic. "I could let you go from here, but I doubt you would ever really be rid of it. In that sense, you resemble your husband rather too much." Breath caught in her throat as Marissa spotted the smallest glint of a weapon under Konstantin's jacket. She couldn't leave. He was right. She only had one last card to use, though. Marissa pulled Ivan's notebook, the one she had discovered stashed in his office, with quivering hands. She slid it across the desk to Konstantin, opening it to a particular page. His eyes flicked over the handwritten notes, and she noticed for the first time a break in his composure. "You believe you could threaten me with this?" Konstantin asked, albeit his voice now had a small edge. Finding her confidence, Marissa said, "It's not just a threat, it's a promise. Ivan noted everything, including your meetings, the deals you closed, the illicit testing. Copies of this notebook will be forwarded to every major news source and law enforcement agency around the nation, should something happen to me." Konstantin's face darkened. The quiet in the room was stifling, and Marissa momentarily considered calling bluffs. Still, he nodded slowly at last. "You're smarter than I would have credited you for," he said gently. "Very nicely, Marissa. You succeed." Until now, his eyes icy and merciless, he pushed the notebook back toward her. "Leave and never return. If you value your life, you will forget about the project and about Ivan. Think of this as your sole cautionary note." Marissa hesitated no at all. Her legs shaking, she grabbed the notebook and left the office under forced, non-running control. She gasped for air as soon as she was outside. The adrenaline at last caught up with her. She had survived, but she knew she had merely purchased a brief solace. Konstantin Stadnik was not a man that pardoned readily. Marissa understood her life would never be able to go back to what it had been as she drove off. Her husband, her mental clarity, almost her life. The truth had cost her everything. She also possessed knowledge, though, now, and that knowledge amounted to power. Marissa bid her former life farewell in the days that followed. She changed her name, moved to a new city, and sold the floral business, along with every clue of her relationship to Ivan's death. The notebook was wrecked. But in the quiet times, when the shadows crept in, she recalled the man she had loved, the secrets he had kept, and the sinister powers that had snatched him from her. Though the war was far from finished, she had won the battle, and Marissa Volkov resolved to survive whatever the future brought. Because once discovered, some secrets cannot ever be buried once more.